On the night of April 1st, large trucks were seen rolling out of the Foxconn technology facility in Wuhan, stacked with equipment and machinery. According to local observations, the equipment had been gradually moved out over the past month, with the final phase taking place discreetly under the cover of night. Some observers speculated that these late-night operations were intentional, a quiet departure designed to avoid public attention or scrutiny. Others believed the equipment might be heading to Vietnam, fueling rumors that Foxconn may not have received orders for future iPhone production. Just 2 days later, another video surfaced online showing neatly packed CNC machines, labeled and ready for transport. This site wasn't isolated. In Shenzhen, similar scenes unfolded. Daily truckloads of machinery were seen leaving Foxconn's electronics facilities. Reports indicated that workers' overtime hours were being diverted to support the relocation effort. One particular shipment came from the Longhua campus, one of Foxconn's largest and most prominent sites in China. While some speculated that the equipment might be temporarily removed for renovations, growing evidence pointed to something more permanent. With mounting frequency, Apple appears to be pivoting away from China and moving its production elsewhere. These facility cleanouts aren't just isolated incidents. They are part of a much larger and increasingly visible shift in Apple's global supply chain strategy, one that's been in motion for several years. Since the onset of the U.S. China trade war in 2018, Apple has been slowly restructuring its supply network. With Donald Trump's return to the U.S. presidency and the resumption of tariffs and trade pressure on China, this transition has accelerated. Apple is now racing to diversify its manufacturing footprint, expanding its presence in India, Vietnam, and other regions. According to a report published by Nikkei Asia on April 14th, Apple is using a 90-day waiver period, granted under updated U.S. tariff policies, to rapidly expand its supply chain infrastructure in India and Vietnam. New production facilities are being built, older equipment is being relocated, and Apple is taking every opportunity to reduce its reliance on Chinese manufacturing. However, this transition hasn't come easily. The Chinese government, wary of losing its grip on a major source of manufacturing and employment, has reportedly imposed stricter customs checks. These intensified inspections have caused significant delays in exporting production equipment out of China. In some cases, the process has slowed to a crawl, costing companies like Apple millions in delays and forced changes to shipping methods. Some suppliers have even had to switch to more expensive air freight just to meet tight deadlines. Insiders from Apple's supply chain have confirmed these challenges. One executive noted that while the company is ready to expand overseas, moving heavy equipment out of China has become a logistical nightmare. Meanwhile, suppliers have started preparing backup plans. Several have begun investing in production bases in Thailand and other Southeast Asian countries. Apple is also actively assisting some of its international partners in acquiring the necessary tools to produce millions more iPhones outside of China, particularly in India. One of Apple's biggest goals is to produce at least 50 million iPhones annually in India by 2025. This would effectively make India the main hub for iPhones sold in the United States. Already, Indian facilities are operating at full capacity, with further expansion constrained by labor, infrastructure, and supply chain limitations. Despite this, Apple has instructed suppliers to ship as many components as possible to Southeast Asia and India to meet rising U.S. demand. Printed circuit boards and other simpler components have already begun transitioning to Thailand and nearby countries. However, relocating more complex parts, such as semiconductors, mechanical housings, and precision-machined metal components, remains difficult. China's cost advantage and production maturity in these sectors make a full transition more complicated than it seems on the surface. Still, the direction is clear. Apple's dependence on China is declining, slowly but steadily. This change hasn't gone unnoticed in Chinese media, though most coverage remains limited or downplayed. Reports about Apple pulling equipment or winding down operations in China rarely make it to mainstream outlets. Instead, the news spreads through social media platforms like Douyin, China's version of TikTok, where locals share what they see with their own eyes. Notably, A recent industry report by TF International Securities analyst Ming-Chi Kuo noted that production lines in China designated for U.S.-bound iPhones were lying idle. The report suggested that India was now taking over much of this workload, beginning in the second quarter of the year. However, this information sparked backlash in mainland China. Kuo's remarks were misinterpreted by several media outlets, which inaccurately claimed that all iPhone assembly lines in China had stopped. These false reports prompted responses from supply chain experts, who refuted the exaggerated claims. Kuo later clarified that his original statement referred only to U.S. market iPhones, and not all global production. He also expressed surprise at how his report had been twisted. Further illustrating the shift, hiring patterns at Foxconn's China facilities have become erratic. In Zhengzhou, home to Foxconn's largest iPhone assembly plant, recruitment efforts resumed on April 14th, but were halted just 2 days later. Recruiters were puzzled by the sudden stop. Despite low wages and smaller-scale hiring compared to previous years, all available slots were quickly filled. In some cases, thousands of applicants signed up within minutes of registration opening. The abrupt end to hiring raised questions. Some speculated that Foxconn had already filled its labor quota, while others pointed to reduced demand due to lower order volumes from Apple. The broader uncertainty seemed tied to Apple's evolving strategy and the ongoing uncertainty in U.S. China trade relations. Similar patterns were seen elsewhere. At Foxconn's Taiyuan facility, hiring began on April 7th and stopped just 2 days later. In regions near Hong Kong, recruitment was also abruptly paused after only a few days. These stops coincided with Apple's growing investments in overseas factories and rising iPhone output from India. Data supports the trend. In the past year, iPhone assembly in India has increased by nearly 60%, signaling Apple's determination to diversify away from China. The company has also been building up its inventory in anticipation of higher tariffs under the Trump administration. According to customs data reported by Reuters, Apple's key suppliers in India, including Foxconn and Tata Electronics, airlifted nearly $2 billion worth of iPhones to the U.S. in March 2025 alone. This marked a record-breaking month for Indian iPhone exports. 6 cargo planes, each loaded with 100 tons of devices, reportedly flew from Chennai to the U.S. during that period. As Apple expands its footprint in India and Vietnam, and as its major partners like Foxconn follow suit, it's clear that the center of gravity for iPhone production is shifting. What once was a China-dominated operation is now becoming a more globalized network. Despite the obstacles, from customs delays to complex component logistics, Apple appears committed to its long-term vision, building a resilient, diversified supply chain that can weather geopolitical uncertainty and trade conflicts. For China, the implications are significant. The gradual departure of Apple and its key suppliers marks the beginning of a new era in global manufacturing, one where the world's most valuable tech company is no longer tethered to a single country, and where the future of electronics production is becoming more decentralized than ever before. The ongoing trade tensions between China and the United States have entered a new and unexpected battleground, the skies. In a bold move, the Chinese government has reportedly ordered its domestic airlines to halt acceptance of Boeing aircraft and U.S.-manufactured aircraft parts. This directive, aimed squarely at America's aviation giant, comes as a retaliatory response to President Trump's aggressive tariff policies. According to sources cited by Bloomberg, the Chinese authorities have instructed their airlines not only to suspend deliveries of Boeing aircraft, but also to stop purchasing related parts and equipment from U.S. companies. The move signals a deepening rift in U.S.-China relations, now extending beyond trade and into the core of global aviation. The escalation came just after China's announcement on April 11th that it would impose a massive 125% retaliatory tariff on U.S. goods. This tariff is expected to more than double the price of American-made aircraft and their components, effectively pricing Boeing out of one of its most important international markets. Yet, despite this aggressive stance, Chinese airlines still operate hundreds of Boeing jets, many of which require regular maintenance, part replacements, and technical support. These existing aircraft now face an uncertain future, as sourcing essential parts becomes significantly more difficult and expensive. Currently, Boeing has about 10 737 MAX aircraft awaiting delivery to Chinese airlines. Among them, China Southern Airlines, Air China, and Xiamen Airlines each had 2 planes scheduled. Some of these aircraft have already arrived in China and are being housed at a maintenance facility in Zhoushan, Zhejiang Province, because these deliveries were completed and paid for before the retaliatory tariff announcement. They may be processed under special exemptions or reviewed on a case-by-case basis. Still, a backlog of undelivered aircraft looms large. Boeing was expected to supply China Southern, Air China, and China Eastern with 81, 45, and 53 new aircraft, respectively, between 2025 and 2027. These future deliveries are now hanging in the balance. The impact of the trade war is already being felt on the ground. China Southern Airlines recently halted the planned sale of 2 used Boeing 787-8s. According to Bloomberg, the airline had hoped to replace these older aircraft with larger, more modern jets to expand its long-haul capacity. However, the abrupt tariff increase threw a wrench into those plans. On April 11th, the same day the new tariffs were announced, China Southern notified the Shanghai United Assets and Equity Exchange that the aircraft sale had been suspended due to unspecified events. Many speculate these events were directly tied to Beijing's retaliatory economic measures. Meanwhile, Junyao Airlines postponed the delivery of a brand new Boeing 787-9, worth an estimated $120 million. The jet was originally scheduled to arrive just 3 weeks later, but rising tensions between Washington and Beijing prompted the airline to put the brakes on the deal. The financial implications for Boeing are significant. According to Bernstein Research, Boeing had planned to deliver 27 737 MAX aircraft and several additional 787 and 777F models to Chinese buyers this year alone. If these orders are canceled, the company stands to lose an estimated $1.2 billion in cash flow. Bloomberg also reported that the mutual imposition of high tariffs has dramatically raised the cost of leasing Boeing jets for Chinese airlines. In response, Chinese officials are exploring various options, including financial support packages, to help domestic carriers absorb these increased expenses. Yet despite the immediate economic fallout, some analysts believe Boeing's long-term prospects remain intact. Seth Seifman, an analyst at J.P. Morgan, stated that while China may not be essential to Boeing's near-term growth, the country will continue to be a critical part of the company's future global strategy. As speculation swirled, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lin Jian was asked about the government's alleged directive to block Boeing deliveries. His response was non-committal. "I'm unaware of the specifics. Please refer to China's relevant authorities." So far, neither the Ministry of Commerce nor the Civil Aviation Administration of China has issued an official statement on the matter. Nevertheless, experts say the symbolic message is clear. Yao Yuan Ye, a professor of international studies at the University of St. Thomas, pointed out that with only 2 major global aircraft manufacturers, Boeing and Airbus, China's decision to block Boeing purchases carries more symbolic weight than practical effect. Airbus often offers more competitive pricing, but Ye warns that China's deep reliance on U.S. aviation technology could ultimately hurt its own interests. Su Tsuyun, director of the Institute for National Defense and Security Research in Taiwan, believes the U.S. may take a short-term financial hit, but Chinese airlines are at greater operational risk. Many of them depend on Boeing aircraft, and a shortage of spare parts could significantly disrupt flight schedules. Interestingly, Boeing has managed to soften the blow. Aircraft that were originally destined for China are now being redirected to India and other fast-growing markets, helping the company stay afloat. According to Su, China has historically tried to balance its aircraft purchases between the U.S. and Europe to maintain diplomatic neutrality. But as relations with Washington continue to sour, Beijing is shifting more orders to Airbus. China is also working to reduce its dependence on foreign aircraft manufacturers altogether by promoting its own domestically produced jet, the C919. Developed by the Commercial Aircraft Corporation of China, COMAC, the C919 is a narrow-body jet designed to compete directly with the Boeing 737 and Airbus A320. It seats approximately 168 passengers and is considered a symbol of China's ambition to become self-sufficient in commercial aviation. Launched in 2008, the project faced multiple delays. The prototype wasn't completed until late 2015, and its first flight took place in 2017. The aircraft finally received its airworthiness certification in 2022 and began commercial operations in May 2023. However, the C919 has had a rocky start. On February 1, 2023, during a verification flight from Shanghai to Huayan via Beijing, one C919 experienced a left engine thrust reverser failure while landing at Beijing Daxing International Airport. The aircraft had to return to Shanghai, and the subsequent flight was canceled. Later that summer, a C919 operated by Shanghai Eastern Airlines was grounded for consecutive days due to technical issues, with its flights replaced by Airbus models. Despite these setbacks, the C919 played a prominent role during the Chinese Lunar New Year travel rush, flying multiple domestic routes. Yet criticism still emerged on Chinese social media, with some questioning the aircraft's reliability. And perhaps most importantly, the C919 isn't as domestic as China claims. The jet still relies heavily on foreign components, including US-made engines and flight control systems. To truly distance itself from American suppliers, China would need to partner more closely with European firms, a move that may create new political and economic complications. For now, it seems that China's retaliation against Boeing is both strategic and symbolic. It sends a message to Washington, but it also introduces substantial risk into China's own aviation sector. President Trump reacted sharply to the news, posting on Truth Social on April 15th. Interestingly, China just reneged on the big Boeing deal, saying that they will not take possession of fully committed to aircraft. China's unilateral breach of contract has strong criticism. According to Professor Ye, China may have painted itself into a corner. The Chinese government agreed to these Boeing deals, but now it's prohibiting them, he said. That opens the door for Boeing to pursue legal action. If successful, Chinese firms may face heavy financial penalties that they cannot easily escape. And if they want to remain competitive in international markets, they'll need to honor contracts with U.S. companies. In the short term, Boeing will likely continue facing challenges in the Chinese market. But over the long haul, the aviation giant may recover through expansion in other regions. China, however, faces a tougher path. Over the next 2 decades, the country is projected to account for 20% of global aircraft demand. If Boeing remains sidelined, Airbus and the still developing C919 will need to shoulder a significant burden, one that may strain resources and expose vulnerabilities. As the trade war evolves, one thing is certain: the skies are no longer a neutral zone.